The sitting duck wasn't much to look at. Once a state-of-the-art scout ship, it now drifted in the empty void, its hull scorched and pitted by decades of neglect. Captain Reeve Taylor ran a hand over the control panel, more out of habit than any hope it would respond. He exhaled slowly, watching his breath fog in the failing atmosphere of the bridge. "This is it," he muttered, breaking the silence. "End of the line." "You said that last time," replied Erin Lark, the ship's engineer, her voice heavy with exhaustion. She sat slumped against a bulkhead, cradling a bundle of exposed wires like a wounded animal. Reeve couldn't argue. The sitting duck had been at the end of the line for weeks now. Their hyperdrive was fried, the life support systems were running on fumes, and food rations had dwindled to nutrient paste that tasted worse than the recycled air. They were stranded in an uncharted region of space, light years from any known human colony. "Something'll break loose," Erin continued, almost to herself. "It always does." Reeve turned to the viewport. Beyond the cracked glass, the stars stretched infinitely, cold and indifferent. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to simply drift forever, to become another piece of space debris swallowed by the void. But the thought didn't settle. Humanity wasn't made to go quietly. "Erin," he said, his voice sharper now, "what's the status on the sublight engines?" She groaned, dragging herself upright. "You're not gonna like it. Best I can do is a crawl, maybe a quarter thrust. That's if the fuel lines don't blow out first. It's better than nothing. Patch it." As Erin moved to the engineering console, Reeve keyed his communicator. "Sykes? Report." "Same as an hour ago, Captain," came the tired voice of Lieutenant Adrian Sykes from the weapons station. "No contacts, no signals. Just empty space. Empty space." The phrase echoed in Reeve's mind. They'd picked up a faint distress beacon 3 days ago, a ghost signal from some long-abandoned satellite, but when they'd followed it, there'd been nothing. No ships, no stations, no signs of life. Just the growing certainty that they were alone. Reeve was about to reply when the ship lurched violently, throwing him against the console. The alarms wailed, red lights flashing in chaotic rhythm. "What the hell was that?" he shouted. Erin swore as sparks flew from the engineering console. "We've got power fluctuations across the grid. Something's drawing." Before she could finish, the viewport lit up with an otherworldly glow. A massive structure loomed ahead, its jagged silhouette blotting out the stars. It was alien, unmistakably so, its surface alive with shifting patterns of light and shadow, like a breathing organism. "Where did that come from?" Reeve barked, scrambling to steady himself. Sykes' voice came through the comm, shaken but clear. "It wasn't there a second ago, Captain. I swear." One moment empty space, the next that thing. Reeve stared at the structure, his heart pounding. It was a ship or maybe a station, though it didn't match any known design in the human database. Whatever it was massive, easily 10 times the size of the sitting duck. "Captain, we've got a problem," Erin shouted. "That thing's draining our systems. If we don't break free now, we're dead in the water." Reeve's mind raced. They couldn't run, not with their engines barely functional, but they couldn't stay either. The ship's dwindling power reserves were being siphoned away, leaving them with fewer and fewer options. "Bring weapons online," he ordered. Captain?" Sykes' voice was hesitant. "You're joking, right? Our weapons are a pair of pulse cannons held together with duct tape. That thing will eat us alive. Just do it," Reeve snapped. Erin's hands flew over the controls, her face set in grim determination. "Sublight engines are patched." "Barely. We've got maybe 2 minutes of thrust." Reeve nodded. "That's all we'll need." "Erin, get ready to punch it." "Sykes, fire a spread." "No aiming, just make some noise." The sitting duck shuddered as its cannons roared to life, spitting bursts of plasma at the alien structure. The light show was laughably small compared to the massive ship, but it seemed to have an effect. The glowing patterns on its surface flickered, as if momentarily disrupted. "Now, Erin!" The engines roared to life, pushing the sitting duck into motion. Reeve gripped the console, his knuckles white as they shot past the alien ship. The viewport was a blur of light and shadow, and for a moment he thought they might actually make it. But then the ship lurched again, harder this time. A guttural hum reverberated through the hull, a sound that seemed almost alive. "They're pulling us back," Aaron screamed. Reeve clenched his jaw. They were out of options. But if humanity was going down, they weren't going to do it quietly. "Aaron, overload the core," he said. Her eyes widened. "That'll kill us." Reeve locked eyes with her. "It's us or them." The hum grew louder, deafening now. The alien ship loomed closer, its surface writhing like a living thing. Reeve took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. Do it. End of Chapter 1. The explosion should have been the end. Reeve braced himself for the fiery death he had ordered, but instead of obliteration, there was silence. A sudden, deafening stillness as the sitting duck was consumed in a blinding white light. When Reeve opened his eyes, he was floating not in space, but in some kind of gravity-nullified chamber. The air was breathable but heavy, tinged with an unfamiliar metallic scent. He could hear faint whispers, though no one was nearby. Aaron and Sykes were nowhere to be seen. "What the hell?" he muttered, spinning in the air to orient himself. The walls of the chamber were translucent, pulsating with an organic glow. It wasn't a ship in the traditional sense. It felt alive, as if it had inhaled him like prey into its lungs. "Aaron? Sykes? Report," he barked into his communicator. But the device was dead. A sudden jolt of pain shot through his head. Images flashed in his mind. Alien symbols, fractal-like patterns, and incomprehensible sounds. He clutched his temples, groaning, but just as quickly as it started, the pain vanished. "Human," a deep, resonant voice echoed around him. It wasn't speech in the conventional sense. The words seemed to bypass his ears and plant themselves directly into his mind. Reeve flinched. "Who's there? Where am I?" "You are aboard the Arkova. You trespassed into its domain. Your kind has no claim to this space." Reeve scanned the room, but there was no discernible source of the voice. He steadied himself. "If this is your domain, you could have let us drift. We weren't a threat." The voice chuckled, an unsettling, layered sound. "A threat? No. You are an anomaly, primitive. Yet you carry something unique." Reeve's fists clenched. "Let my crew go. Whatever you think we've done, we'll leave. No harm, no foul." The chamber shifted, its walls rippling like liquid. A section of the floor opened, and Reeve was dropped unceremoniously into another room. This one was vast and filled with eerie light, casting long, unnatural shadows. At the center of the room, suspended in a translucent cocoon, was Aaron. Her body was limp, her head tilted as though unconscious. "Aaron!" Reeve shouted, rushing toward her. "She is unharmed. For now," the voice said. Reeve skidded to a halt, glaring at the unseen entity. "What do you want?" The glow around Aaron's cocoon intensified. "Your species does not belong in this quadrant. Yet you have ventured here. Your ship, as you call it, carried a frequency that drew the Arkova's attention." "Explain." Reeve's mind raced. "A frequency?" The sitting duck wasn't broadcasting anything unusual, at least not intentionally. Could it have been the distress beacon they'd intercepted? "We followed a signal," Reeve said carefully. "A distress call. We thought someone needed help." "Help?" The voice lingered on the word as though tasting it. "Your kind often misunderstands what it cannot grasp. That signal was ancient. A lure set long ago. A lure for prey." The implications hit Reeve like a punch to the gut. They'd walked, or rather limped, straight into a trap. "You're saying you baited us?" "The Arkova does not bait. Consumes. You arrived by your own will." Reeve's jaw tightened. "If you wanted to kill us, you'd have done it already. So what's stopping you?" There was a pause, the silence heavy and oppressive. Then the voice spoke again, slower this time, as if contemplating. "Curiosity. Your kind adapts, survives. That is rare among the lesser species." "Yeah, we're real scrappy," Reeve said dryly, inching closer to Aaron's cocoon. "But if you've got nothing to gain from us, let us go." Another chuckle echoed, colder this time. You misunderstand. The Arkova does not release what it captures. But it does. Study. Reeve gritted his teeth. He needed a plan, fast. His survival instincts kicked in, his mind cycling through possibilities. He glanced at Aaron's cocoon, then at the room around them. There had to be a way to disrupt whatever was powering this place. What about her? Reeve asked, motioning toward Aaron. You don't seem to be doing much studying, if she's just floating there. She is in stasis, her neural pathways being mapped. A process that will soon be complete. Reeve's heart pounded. He had no idea what mapping entailed, but he wasn't about to wait around to find out. Yeah, well, humans don't map so easily, he said, stalling. We've got this thing called free will. Makes us unpredictable. The voice seemed amused. A delusion you cling to, yet you are not entirely wrong. It is why you are still alive. Reeve seized the opening. If unpredictability is what you're after, why not cut to the chase? Let me out of here, and I'll show you just how adaptive humans can be. The chamber trembled, as if considering his words. Then, with a sudden lurch, the cocoon around Aaron began to dissolve. She fell to the floor in a heap, gasping for air. Captain, she croaked, her voice weak. Aaron! Reeve was at her side in seconds, helping her to her feet. Your resilience is intriguing, the voice said. You will be tested further. Before Reeve could respond, the room shifted again, the walls folding inward like the pages of a book. They were dropped onto a narrow platform suspended over an endless void, the edges shrouded in darkness. What now? Aaron groaned, clutching her side. I think we're about to find out, Reeve muttered, his eyes scanning the darkness. Shapes began to emerge from the void, creatures unlike anything Reeve had ever seen. They were amorphous, shifting masses of light and shadow, their forms constantly changing. Defend yourselves, the voice commanded. Reeve didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed a jagged piece of metal that had fallen from Aaron's cocoon, holding it like a makeshift weapon. Aaron, stay close. The creatures lunged, their movements eerily fluid. Reeve swung the metal shard, striking one of the beings. It dissolved on impact, but more replaced it, their numbers seemingly endless. Aaron scrambled to her feet, grabbing a piece of debris. Any chance we can reason with them? Doesn't seem like the talkative type, Reeve shouted, dodging another attack. The battle was chaos. Every time they destroyed one creature, two more appeared. The platform beneath them trembled, cracks forming as if the structure itself was alive and reacting to the fight. Reeve's mind raced. There had to be a way out, a weakness they could exploit. He glanced at the edges of the platform, where the darkness seemed to pulse in time with the creature's movements. Aaron, the edges. I think they're tied to whatever's controlling this place. She nodded, already moving. Together, they began attacking the edges of the platform, their blows disrupting the pulsing light. The creatures faltered, their movements growing erratic. It's working, Aaron shouted. The platform shuddered violently, and the creatures dissolved into the void. The voice returned, louder this time, its tone laced with something akin to anger. Interesting. You persist. Even against inevitability. Reeve glared into the void. You wanted to see what humans are capable of? Now you know. The voice was silent for a moment. Then, with a deafening roar, the platform collapsed, plunging them into the darkness. End of Chapter 2. The fall into darkness seemed endless. Reeve's stomach churned as the cold void swallowed him and Aaron. Gravity was erratic, pulling one moment and releasing the next, as though the space itself was indecisive. Reeve! Aaron's voice was panicked, barely audible over the rush of windless motion. What's happening? No clue. Hold on to something, he shouted, though there was nothing to hold. A blinding light erupted below them, and before they could react, they slammed into a solid surface. Reeve groaned, pain radiating through his body as he forced himself to sit up. The ground beneath him was smooth and glass-like, radiating an eerie, soft glow. Aaron landed nearby, coughing but conscious. That was worse than the crash, she muttered, clutching her ribs. Reeve crawled over to her, checking for injuries. Still alive. Barely, she replied with a grimace. What now? He scanned their surroundings. They were in a vast, circular chamber, the walls lined with incomprehensible machinery that hummed with energy. A massive, crystalline structure floated in the center, pulsating with a kaleidoscope of colors. It seemed alive, radiating a presence that made the hair on Reeve's neck stand on end. I'm guessing that's the heart of this place, Reeve said, nodding toward the crystal. Aaron's eyes narrowed. You think it's controlling the Arkova? Only one way to find out, he said, helping her to her feet. As they approached the crystal, the voice returned, more forceful and resonant than before. You continue to defy the inevitable. Why? Reeve stopped, glaring into the emptiness. Because that's what humans do. You don't seem to understand that yet. The crystal flared, the colors shifting violently. Defiance is illogical. Resistance will not change your fate. Maybe not, Reeve shot back. But if we're going down, we're taking you with us. The chamber shook, and tendrils of light erupted from the crystal, snaking toward them like living wires. Reeve shoved Aaron aside as one of the tendrils lashed out, slamming into the ground where she'd stood. Move! He yelled, diving for cover behind a jagged piece of machinery. The tendrils whipped through the air, their movements erratic but deadly. Aaron ducked behind another piece of debris, her breathing ragged. Reeve, this isn't sustainable. We can't fight this thing with scrap metal. Reeve's mind raced. They needed a way to disrupt the crystal, but attacking it directly was suicide. His eyes darted around the chamber, searching for something, anything they could use. Then he noticed the machinery lining the walls. It pulsed in time with the crystal as though connected. Aaron, the machines, he called out. They're tied to the crystal. If we take them out, it might weaken it. Aaron peeked out from her cover, nodding. Worth a shot. They sprinted toward the nearest machine, dodging tendrils as they went. Reeve reached it first, slamming his makeshift weapon into the glowing interface. Sparks flew, and the hum of energy faltered for a moment before resuming. Harder! Aaron shouted, joining him. Together, they hammered at the machine until it shattered, the light within it flickering and dying. The crystal let out a deafening screech, its tendrils flailing wildly. Reeve grinned despite himself. It's working. Go for the next one. They moved from machine to machine, smashing and disabling as many as they could. Each destroyed device seemed to sap the crystal's strength, its glow dimming with every blow. But the Arkova wasn't going down without a fight. The tendrils became faster and more precise, forcing them to split up. Reeve narrowly avoided a strike that carved a molten scar into the floor, while Aaron dove behind another machine, panting heavily. Reeve, she called out. We can't keep this up much longer. I know, he shouted back, slamming his weapon into another device. Just a little more. As he destroyed the machine, the crystal let out another screech, this one more guttural and desperate. The chamber began to tremble, cracks spidering across the walls and floor. We're destabilizing it, Aaron yelled. Reeve nodded, adrenaline surging. But just as he turned toward the next machine, a tendril caught him across the chest, sending him flying. He slammed into the ground, gasping for air as pain shot through his ribs. Reeve! Aaron screamed, rushing toward him. I'm fine, he coughed, though the blood on his lips said otherwise. Finish it. Aaron hesitated, her eyes darting between him and the last few machines. Then she nodded, determination hardening her expression. As Aaron continued smashing the machinery, Reeve dragged himself toward the center of the chamber. If they didn't finish this now, they wouldn't get another chance. He reached the crystal, its glow now dim and flickering. You persist, the voice growled, weaker now. Reeve smirked, despite the pain. Told you, humans don't quit. He grabbed a shard of broken metal from the ground, lifting it with trembling hands. This is for my crew. With a final surge of strength, he drove the shard into the crystal. The room erupted in light, the energy within the crystal cascading outward in a blinding wave. Reeve was thrown back as the chamber collapsed around him. He could hear the Arkova's voice screaming, a sound that was more than just noise. It was pure rage and fear, fading into nothingness. Then there was silence. When Reeve opened his eyes, he was back on the sitting duck. The ship's systems were online, the hum of the engine steady and reassuring. "Captain," Erin's voice called out. He turned to see her rushing toward him, relief etched on her face. "You're awake." "What happened?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "The Arkova." "It's gone," she said, sitting beside him. "Whatever you did, it destroyed the whole thing. We were thrown clear just before the blast." Reeve let out a shaky breath, leaning back against the wall. "And the ship?" "Barely holding together, but it's functional," Erin replied with a faint smile. "We're alive, Reeve. Somehow we're alive." He closed his eyes, exhaustion washing over him. "Set course for the nearest colony." "We're going home." Erin nodded, standing and heading for the controls. Reeve watched her go, a small smile tugging at his lips. They'd survived the Arkova. But as the sitting duck limped away from the wreckage, Reeve couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The galaxy was vast, and the Arkova was just one of many unknowns lurking in the void. For now, though, they had earned their survival, and that was enough. End of Chapter 3. The sitting duck crawled through space, its engines barely holding together. The bridge smelled of burnt circuits and stale air, but it was alive, against all odds. Reeve leaned back in the captain's chair, his body aching from bruises and burns. The adrenaline of their escape had faded, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. "Status report," he said, his voice hoarse. Erin was hunched over the engineering console, one hand gripping her side where a hastily wrapped bandage covered a deep gash. "Engines are functional, barely. Life support is stable for now, but the recyclers are maxed out. We've got about 3 days of breathable air." "Sykes?" Reeve asked, glancing toward the weapons station. Lieutenant Adrian Sykes, who had been unconscious for most of their ordeal, was awake now, though his face was pale. He checked his console, frowning. "No hostile contacts. Long-range sensors are offline, but short-range is clear." "Good," Reeve said, nodding. "Set course for the nearest colony. I don't care if it's a mining station or a scrapyard. Just get us somewhere with food and oxygen." Erin punched in coordinates, her movements sluggish but determined. "There's a refueling station about 12 light-years away. If we push the engines to half-thrust, we can make it in 2 days." "Do it," Reeve said. As the sitting duck limped forward, the bridge fell into an uneasy silence. The crew's relief at surviving the Arkova was tempered by the reality of their situation. They were battered, their ship barely operational, and the weight of what they had faced lingered like a shadow. Later, in the dimly lit mess hall, Reeve sat across from Erin and Sykes. The table between them held a tray of nutrient paste, their last rations. No one was eating. "You ever wonder why?" Erin asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Why what?" Reeve replied. "Why things like the Arkova exist," she said, staring at her hands. "It wasn't just some alien ship. It was something else, something ancient. It didn't want to destroy us. It wanted to study us, like we were bugs under a magnifying glass." Reeve frowned, his thoughts drifting back to the voice that had spoken to him, the way it had probed his mind. "Maybe it wasn't trying to kill us at first," he admitted. "But it didn't think much of us either. It saw us as lesser, something to dissect and discard." Sykes snorted. "Guess we showed it, huh? Humans. Scrappy, stubborn, and impossible to kill." Erin didn't laugh. Her eyes were distant. "But what if we're not done with it? What if there are more out there, things like the Arkova?" Reeve leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Then we do what we always do. We adapt. We survive." Hours later, Reeve was back on the bridge, staring out at the vast emptiness of space. Despite the exhaustion pulling at him, sleep felt impossible. The image of the Arkova's crystal core still burned in his mind. The hum of the ship's engines was the only sound until Erin joined him, leaning against the console. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Too much to think about," Reeve said. not taking his eyes off the viewport. Aaron nodded, her expression serious. I've been running diagnostics on the ship. There's something you need to see. Reeve turned to her, his brow furrowing. What is it? She handed him a datapad. It's from the distress beacon we picked up. I thought it was just static or corrupted data, but when I cleaned up the signal, Reeve took the datapad, his stomach tightening as he read the decoded message. To any who receive this, the Arcova is only the beginning. Beware the empty space. Beware what lies beyond. The words sent a chill down his spine. This isn't possible. That beacon was ancient, older than any human technology. Aaron nodded grimly, and yet it mentions the Arcova by name. Whoever sent this knew about it. Reeve's mind raced. If the Arcova was part of something larger, then their encounter wasn't a fluke. It was a warning. We need to report this, he said, standing. As soon as we reach the station, we contact command. They need to know what's out here. Aaron hesitated. You think they'll listen? We're a broken-down scout ship with no evidence to back us up. Command might just write us off as a couple of lunatics who got lost in deep space. Reeve clenched his fists. Then we make them listen. Whatever's out there, it's a threat to everyone, human or otherwise. 2 days later, the sitting duck limped into the docking bay of a small refueling station on the edge of known space. The station was little more than a cluster of modules held together by scaffolding, but to Reeve and his crew, it was a lifeline. The station's administrator, a wiry man named Dran Koval, greeted them with a mix of skepticism and pity. You look like you've been through hell, he said, eyeing the scorched hull of the sitting duck. Something like that, Reeve replied. We need repairs, supplies, and a secure connection to relay a message to command. Koval raised an eyebrow. What kind of message? The urgent kind, Reeve said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Hours later, Reeve stood in the station's comms room, staring at the screen as his message transmitted. It was a detailed report of their encounter with the Arcova, along with the decoded warning from the beacon. Do you think they'll believe us? Aaron asked, standing beside him. They'd better, Reeve said, because if they don't, the next crew that stumbles into that empty space might not make it back. The comms officer interrupted. Message transmitted. We'll forward any response to your ship. Thanks, Reeve said, turning to leave. As he walked back toward the sitting duck, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The galaxy had always been dangerous, but now it felt different, more hostile. When he reached the ship, Sykes was waiting for him. Repairs are underway, he said. We'll be spaceworthy in a week, maybe less. Good, Reeve said. Sykes hesitated. What's next, Captain? After this, Reeve stared out at the stars, his jaw tightening. We prepare. We find out what's really out there. And we make sure humanity is ready for it. Later that night, as the crew slept, Reeve sat alone in his quarters, staring at the datapad with the decoded message. The words felt heavier now, as if they carried a weight he didn't yet fully understand. The Arcova is only the beginning. Beware the empty space. Beware what lies beyond. Reeve set the datapad down, his resolve hardening. The Arcova might be gone, but the threat it represented wasn't. Humanity wasn't just exploring the stars anymore. It was facing the unknown, and the unknown wasn't friendly. For now, they had survived. But survival wasn't enough. They had to fight, and Reeve Taylor was ready. End of Chapter 4.